Hello everyone, IceCool Tech here. Now there is no denying that iOS 16 has been a really buggy release with so many things going unfixed even into the iOS 16.5 beta. However, one of the most prevalent and perhaps the most notorious bug that I have seen users reporting constantly, no matter the device, is battery drain. Now, battery drain is one of those issues that needs to be taken very seriously, especially if you rely on your phone for school, work, or some other purpose, and must have access to it as much as possible. So in this video, I will be showing you all of the ways to save some serious battery life on iOS 16. Alright, so the first setting we're going to take a look at is called Background App Refresh. We're going to open up the Settings app, navigate to General, Background App Refresh. Now, if you don't know what Background App Refresh is, essentially it allows apps to refresh their content in the background when not in use, which does consume a little bit of battery life. Depending on how many apps you have in this list here, as well as how many of them are enabled, it can use quite a bit of battery life. Usually iOS is good at managing this, but again, the more apps enabled refreshing their content in the background, naturally the more your battery will be used. So, for example, here, maybe I don't want Twitter refreshing its content in the background when I'm not using it, and go ahead and disable that, and it will no longer refresh. Now, I do like to keep that enabled, so I will enable that again. Now, of course, up here, you can completely disable background app refresh by setting it to off, or save a little bit of extra battery life by setting it to Wi-Fi only, so apps will only refresh their content in the background when you are connected to a Wi-Fi network. Now this will save a little bit of extra battery life. Whether or not it's enough to be noticeable is a different story, especially if you're somebody who is on Wi-Fi most of the time. If you're on cellular data most of the time, this may have a bigger impact. Cellular data does use slightly more battery life than Wi-Fi, so naturally Wi-Fi only will save a little bit. Now, next up is brightness. If you are somebody who does not like using auto brightness, make sure that you are trying to keep your brightness as low as possible for as long as possible in order to save battery. Of course, using higher brightnesses will use more battery life and cause some other issues such as maybe overheating. Now, for those of you that would like to enable auto brightness as it is recommended to save battery life, we're going to go back to the main settings page, tap accessibility, display and text size, scroll down, and all the way at the bottom is auto brightness. You can toggle this on or off just like that. Let me lower the brightness just a little bit here. There we go. And so your brightness will change automatically based off of your surrounding lighting conditions. Now, speaking of displays, we're going to head back to the main settings menu, go to display and brightness, and enable dark mode. Now, I would like to mention that this only applies to those of you using iPhones with OLED panels, so that means the iPhone 10, iPhone XS, XS Max, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, any iPhone 12 model, and any iPhone 13 model, as well as any iPhone 14 model. All of these devices use OLED panels, so when a black is displayed, the pixels are turned off, just like if you were to turn off your phone. So this does save battery life, especially in apps where there are a lot of black spaces. Now, this will not work on phones like any iPhone SE, the iPhone XR, or the iPhone 11, because those use LCD panels, which rely on pixels being lit up to recreate blacks. Alright, so we find ourselves on the main settings page yet again. Now we're going to scroll down just a little bit further to Siri and search, tap that. Scroll down until you see this potentially long list of apps. Now, what these options do are allow Siri and search to learn from the apps and suggest it to you, which can use a little bit more battery life, of course, depending on how long this list is and how many of these you have enabled. So in my case, I have every app enabled for everything. Of course, if you have like an infinitely long list, you will want to go through this and disable whatever you can or you feel comfortable disabling. The more apps with everything enabled, the more battery life your iPhone or iPad will use. Alright, so climbing down the iOS settings ladder here, we find ourselves at battery. Now, I'd recommend taking a look at these graphs here. These graphs show really useful information and will allow you to see if any of your apps are using an insane amount of battery when they shouldn't be. Of course, if you go to our last 10-day view, which mine is only 8 days because on Wednesday it decided to completely erase the prior days, but whatever, I don't really care. You can see, okay, for example, YouTube in the last 8 days, I had 13 hours and 16 minutes on screen, total, both between on screen and background. Used about 30% of battery. Twitter, about 10 hours and 30 minutes total using 19%, etc., etc. Now, personally, just what I like to do here, see on Monday I have about 50% used. I usually like to look at the ones that are right around that mark, see how much my screen active time was, and then considering that another 50% would be another 6 hours, roughly, that would be about 12 minutes. Yes, that would be around 12 minutes. That would be around 12 hours of on-screen time, which is excellent. Usually I get about 10 hours on this one, so I will take that as a win. Now scroll up a little bit, battery health and charging. Make sure that your maximum capacity is not 80% or lower. If it is, you can take it to Apple and have them replace it. Depending on the iPhone you have, this could be anywhere from really $50 US to $100. But of course, I would recommend making sure that you are not at that threshold yet, because you will notice your battery draining much faster when they are at lower capacities. Now, I would also recommend enabling optimized battery charging. This is to help your maximum capacity stay high over the course of time. I've never had an issue with it, and I'd recommend it just for battery longevity. Alright, so now that we are back on the main settings page, we are going to find privacy and security, open that up. First, we're going to go ahead and scroll down to analytics and improvements. Make sure that you disable anything that you don't need that may be enabled in this menu. For example, I only like to keep the general analytics for my iPhone and Apple Watch, as well as the enhanced beta feedback, as I'm usually on iOS betas, as well as improved hand washing for my Apple Watch. Other than that, I keep everything else disabled. What this does is it will collect any data from your use. For example, if you're using hand washing with your Apple Watch, collect data from that session, send it to Apple. Now, of course, these run in the background using slightly more battery, so I would recommend disabling anything that you don't need. Of course, we're going to go back one menu up to location services. Now, in this menu here, you can have another list of apps, and make sure that you set as many of these to never for location access as possible, as when you're on Wi-Fi and cellular data, it will be continuously using your location in the background, which will use a little bit more battery life. Now, once you're done with that, make sure we go to System Services here and disable any of these that you do not need. So for example, I pretty much keep everything on, but of course I have improved maps and Wi-Fi calling disabled because I don't need them. The rest I do like to keep enabled. These will use slightly more battery life, as they usually run on Wi-Fi and cellular data, especially a couple of these here mostly run on cellular, which will drain your battery a little bit more. So make sure you just go through here, disable whatever you don't need, and then you can head back to the main settings menu. Alright, so on the main page of settings, we're going to go ahead and navigate to App Store, where we are going to disable as many automatic download options as possible. You can see I pretty much have everything disabled in here. Of course, because automatic downloads continuously looks for new downloads from other devices on Wi-Fi and cellular, where it will automatically then download that on this device. So disabling these will typically save you a little bit of extra battery life. Alright, next up we're going to navigate our mail settings, tap accounts, tap fetch new data. We're going to scroll down until you see fetch. You can select this manually, hourly, every 30 or 15 minutes. Now, of course, as it states right here, use fetch less frequently for better battery life. So manually giving the best battery life, considering it will only run when you run it. Now, of course, if we go up here, you can select any mailbox here and change the same scheduling settings. So I like to keep mine on push because I'm not too worried about my battery life throughout the day. But if you are concerned about battery life and don't care that much about mail running automatically, you can select manual here for the best battery life, and of course fetch for slightly better, but manual is probably ideal for that scenario. Alright, now we're going to head over to our Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings. Now, as is widely known, you cannot disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth completely from the control center. In fact, it only prohibits new connections until the next day. Now, that means that it will still be checking for other connections between Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in the background, which will use up extra battery life. So if you are running low on battery, or you'd like to save some extra battery, maybe you don't have any Bluetooth devices, just go ahead and disable that from settings. Now, I'm not going to do that because I do have a couple of devices connected to settings, but again, this is something you should disable from settings if you do not need them and you're running low on battery life or would just like to save some extra. Alright, now this next one is for those of you using an iPhone 12 or later, including the latest iPhone SE 3rd generation. Now go to your cellular settings, cellular data options, voice and data, and disable 5G by enabling LTE only. 5G does use up quite a bit of battery life, and it does cause your device to overheat a little as well, which only contributes to battery drain. So I'd recommend enabling LTE only, especially for those of you that do not need 5G speeds at all and are perfectly fine with LTE in your area. If we go back one menu, you can also choose low data mode, which will save some battery life as well, considering it will reduce the amount of cellular data you are using. Alright, so next up in sounds and haptics, especially with iOS 16, keyboard haptic feedback was finally released. Now, by disabling this, you will be saving quite a bit of battery life. Keyboard haptics do actually cause some battery drain. It even prompted Apple to put out a support document talking about that. Now, I'd also recommend disabling any other haptics like system haptics, as this will save even more battery life. Alright, so we find our way back to display and brightness here. Scroll down just a little bit. You can customize your auto lock settings. The lower the better, of course, especially if you have a habit of walking away from your phone for extended periods of time and you have your auto lock set to never. For example, if you set your phone to 30 seconds, walk away for a few minutes, your phone will turn off after 30 seconds using the least amount of battery life, versus somebody who has it set to never and doesn't return back for the same amount of time. The display will be on the entire time using more battery life. I like to keep mine around the 3-minute mark. I think that is ideal for me, but let me know what you guys have auto lock set to in the comments below. Alright, so for you iPhone 14 Pro users, we are going to go back out one menu to display and brightness, open up our always on display settings, and here you can disable the wallpaper notifications or disable the always on display entirely. Now, tests have shown that disabling the wallpaper in favor for just a black screen with the time and widgets does not actually save all that much battery life. In fact, it's pretty insignificant how much battery life you do save by doing that. The wallpaper with always on display doesn't actually use as much battery as people thought it would initially. It has proven to be really good. I have not noticed any battery drain as long as I've been using this phone. However, disabling always on display, of course, in the long run does actually save quite a bit of battery life. But again, we're talking about over 24 hours with always on display enabled versus disabled straight. Very long amount of time. Probably insignificant for 99% of people, but it is always an option. Alright, now for iPhone 13 Pro, 13 Pro Max, 14 Pro, and 14 Pro Max users, we're going to go ahead and navigate to accessibility, motion, and enabling limit frame rate. What this does is it caps the display's refresh rate to 60 Hz per second versus the max being 120, which will, in some cases, dramatically save battery life. This is really useful for those of you with those iPhones, and it should be enabled for as much battery life as possible. And one more tip for those of you on iOS 16 or later, in settings we go to wallpaper, add new wallpaper. While a lot of these wallpapers look really great, some of them do tend to drain more battery than others. For example, our weather and astronomy. Now, due to the fact that these use your location and they refresh weather content and other information in the background constantly, these wallpapers here in particular will use some more battery life than maybe the default iOS 16 wallpaper, for example, will. So it is recommended that you take that into consideration, especially considering I know some of you out there aren't able to resist using some of these wallpapers, because let's admit they are very cool.
Alright everyone, that is all I have for this video. If you did find it helpful in any way, shape, or form, make sure to leave a thumbs up on the video down below, as well as hit that subscribe button with the notifications enabled, as I will have more iOS battery drain content coming soon. Now, let me know in the comments below what iPhone, iPad, or other Apple device you are currently using to watch this video. Anyways, that is all I have for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.